We are looking at a blank page other than the title, The Murders Have Started Again, and by J. Wilburn. And so that's how every story begins. I have a few concerns about this particular story idea. It's one of those things that I think might actually work better as a longer story. So the concept may be a little too big for a short story, but I felt that way before, and then still kind of made it work. So even when I'm writing novels or working out novel ideas, a lot of times I'll write short story versions of various parts of the story ideas just to kind of work out the details, the rules, what fits and what doesn't. And so maybe this story is going to end up being something along those lines, although I don't foresee myself pushing this into a novel idea, but we'll see how that works out. So let's just go ahead and begin. John Perkins stood in the dark hallway with light spilling across the tiles from the school's attached gym. The sharp, let's say the bright. Hey, thanks for dropping in, man. From France. Cool. I appreciate you being here. All right. The bright light stopped short of his feet and made the rest of the hallway appear darker. Lockers lined both walls all the way to the first classroom doors, locked across from each other. All right, locked across from each other. All right. John had checked the handles on his way down, on his way, let's say, through the school. Hold on. I'm going to stick with the same paragraph. This is turning into a long paragraph, but I think that's okay. All right. He couldn't see much further than that, but there wasn't much more to see along the sprawl of empty classes. He took, let's say from the gym, other colored lights flashed and spun, adding flavor to the spread of light on the floor. Music that was 3 decades old thundered out the open doors and through the empty school. John took a deep breath. entered the gym. Let me change that. Entered the wall of noise. Alright. The view inside, let's say scene. The scene inside was underwhelming. We need a lowercase scene. The scene inside was underwhelming. Let's find out why it was underwhelming. The music was too loud, and even though John had graduated in the early 90s too, he did not recognize the growling. Let me spell 90s correctly. He did not recognize the growling vocals coming through the speakers. The tones of unanswered angst. I'll say teen angst. You always say teen angst. You never just say angst. The tones of unanswered teen angst still resonated somewhere in the back of his skull, where he kept his animalistic instincts and his love-hate relationship with grunge. Okay. The DJ bobbed his head from the small side stage near the folded bleachers, but looked distracted and bored. John did a quick count. There were only 17 alumni in the room. Let me make this a new paragraph. Alright, there were only 17 alumni in the entire space, not counting himself. And why would he count himself? That should have been all of them. He knew all their names and was keeping tabs on them. He could even tell where each one was staying, including the ones crashing with their folks, and the ones who never left town in the first place. All right, let me be more specific down here. Who never left Fuller Beach in the first place. this was everyone he knew that should be here. Maybe that was a bad thing for his theory and in solving the most recent slayings. The small pocket of humanity on the scant floor had divided into two overlapping tribes. Tribe 1, the largest, were the drinkers. They had beers and harder stuff and were putting it away at a rate that made up for their low numbers. That made up for their low numbers. All right. Tribe. Let's talk about the drinking. There shouldn't have been any drinking in the school, even for adults pushing into their 50s. All right, let me make this another paragraph. I'm getting a little convoluted here with where I'm dividing paragraphs, but we'll just do it to keep the flow going. John was the only law in the building, and he wasn't here to bust drinkers. The second tribe were the dancers. They moved with stiff joints and awkward skills. Well, let's say questionable dance skills. The drinking tribe was bleeding over into the dancers, making the whole scene more awkward by the moment. John was wrong. There was a third tribe of one. She sat at one of the round tables near the back of the gym alone. There had to be almost as many tables as there were people. The organizers of this 30-year reunion for Fuller Beach High School had to be a little embarrassed. John moved to the table and called over the distorted guitar solo. Do you have room for me, Addison? She looked up at him, squinted, tilted her head, shook it, and waved at the seat next to her on her right. John accepted. Addison Carr asked, "What the hell are you doing here?" "It's good to see you too. And your family?" "Doing great. Did you forget what high school you actually went to, John? Or are you a very late transfer?" Okay. "Doing great. Did you forget what high school you actually went to, John, or are you a very late transfer?" He smiled and acted like he was looking at the others dancing. "Just in town and decided to drop in. Is your family still in Butler?" "No, they moved several years ago. Dad retired and they moved away from the beach instead of toward it. And gave up all this." She waved a hand at the other 16 classmates. He laughed with genuine humor. "Hard to believe, isn't it? Are you still a state cop, John?" He met eyes with her, and his smile felt less genuine. I'm with the State Bureau. I can't ever spell bureau. I don't even know if I'm close enough for the computer to fix it for me. Yes, I am. Gradual improvement, I guess. He met eyes with her, and his smile felt less genuine. I'm with the State Bureau. Do I call you Officer Perkins or Agent Perkins? John is fine. So you're not here on official business. He scanned the crowd again and brought his attention back on her. I'm here to bust these hellions for drinking on school grounds. The wagon is on its way to round you all up, including the DJ. Good. Good, she said. That DJ is performing many crimes with each new song. She held up her cup that was clear and bubbling. I'm only drinking Sprite, though. I'm afraid maybe I can turn informant for you. I think we have enough evidence without your testimony, he said. Only Sprite. What a bore. Are you still Southern Baptist? Not quite. Not quite. She winked at him. A couple more friends, and you and I could throw a church youth group reunion. It would probably blow the socks off this thing. Okay. I could try to get a beer away from them for you if you'd like, he said. I'm capable of supplying applying myself when I'm in the mood. I hate that they didn't plan this thing at a restaurant or club instead of back in the gym, like at the 5-year reunion. Feels like a step backward. Okay, let me fix this, sorry. Feels like a step backward, doesn't it? Every time I come back to town, it feels like going backwards, John. Yet you've made every reunion since the first one, right? How would you know such a thing, John? He smiled in a way that stretched his face muscles tight. He winked. You are a material witness in all these old people drinking and dancing. What case are you investigating, John? Fess up. We should use you for interrogations. We should use you for our interrogations. You're no nonsense. After a pause in which an R&B song started to the groans of the drunk rednecks on the floor. Addison broke the silence. Is it the murders? He stared hard at her. Why would you think such a thing? Because they stopped shortly after we graduated, right? She asked, when he said nothing in response, she continued. Then they started up again 5 years later and lasted a few months. Then again at the 10-year mark, the 15th, the 20, the 21 weekend at 25 years, and now, right? That about sums it up, Addison. Have you been scrapbooking? She smiled and rolled her eyes. My parents are still in town, and there is no better gossip than a serial killer you guys can't catch. We should get your mom on the case then, John said. His eyes weren't leaving hers now. Okay. Oh, thank you for the subscription. I really appreciate it. Hope you're enjoying what you're getting here. I'm still figuring this story out as I go, but I appreciate you jumping on board. That really does mean a lot. All right, we should get your mom on the case then, John said. His eyes weren't leaving hers now. I have to warn you, John. All right, I have to warn you, John. She's just as interested in church gossip, celebrity news, Facebook conspiracy theories, and I should leave it at that. Once you start doing long lists like this, it starts to not sound real. Too much like a writer writing it, I guess. She's just as interested in church gossip, celebrity news, and Facebook conspiracy theories. I'm afraid. A rogue investigator, I see, he said. They are never as sexy as the TV makes them out to be, always causing us trouble. My mom just sends me chain letters in Messenger like she did when she first figured out she first figured out. Oh, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. All right. My mom just sends me chain letters in Messenger like she did when she first figured out email. All right. We should lock them up instead. Addison took a sip of Sprite. Let's make it a small sip. A small sip of Sprite. They have Facebook jail for that sort of thing. So you are here about the murders, huh? John sighed and said, hard to say what is going on. Can't be too hard. You found yourself in a room with a dozen or so people. Can't be too hard. You found yourself in a room with a dozen or so people who are only here every 5 years, right? Tell me more. He leaned on the table. She narrowed her eyes. How do you know that it's not just unrelated killings? You know how this town is with the tourists, seasonal workers, and runaways. The per capita murder rate here is higher than the big cities. Is that a fact, Addison? She shrugged and said, okay, let's find out what she shrugged and said, shall we? She shrugged and said, according to my mom, all these true crime Netflix shows have her as a near expert at this point. John showed his teeth before he licked his lips and pulled his mouth into a line again. All right. I try to avoid this sometimes where I'm doing these micro expression things. It may be better just to say John said something and keep it moving, but occasionally it kind of, if you don't overuse it, it makes them sound real. So like you're really there, really watching their expressions, but we'll see. This may be something that needs to be cut in the editing phase. she's not wrong. There are some distinctions. There are some distinctions to these killings that set them apart more than just the pauses. No, he wouldn't say pauses, more than just the intervals between. The scalping, she said, and the drawings in blood. John sat for a moment as a tune by Michael Jackson, let's say a tune from Michael Jackson's late career catalog came over the speakers. The crowd didn't protest, but many of them sat at the tables a little farther away from this pair. All right. Okay. That, among other things, I suppose, could be a copycat, she said. Still makes it murders, and the good folks of Rutledge County like us to solve those sorts of things. Still makes it murders, and the good folks of Rutledge County like us to solve those sorts of things before the 40-year reunion rolls around. Okay. Was there other stuff you guys kept back from the public that tell you these recent killings are like the others? He pulled his chair closer to her. She did not draw away, even in her body language. John pitched his voice a little lower. If you had to guess, Addison, what would you think those things were? How would I know, John? few ways you could really. Did your mom mention anything? I like the true crime Netflix shows too. I know you guys keep some secrets for this reason. Well, if you have an idea, of who I should be looking into, let me know. If you think it's one of these folks, you might look at who isn't in the room right now. John took his eyes off her finally, but brought them back quickly. Everyone appears to be here at the moment. She smiled wide and set her sprite on the table. So you do think it's one of us? Is it possible it is one of us who came to town each of those years but didn't actually attend? We're keeping an eye out for lots of possibilities, he said. All right, we're keeping an eye out for lots of possibilities, he said. There are only so many folks who attended every reunion, especially now that we are down to this few. I attended every reunion, she said. Did you know that? I'll make note of that now. You already knew that, John. Why bother pretending otherwise? Old habit, he said. We're near the end of this, by the way. A few lines left and we'll hit the conclusion I think this story's going to have. Old habit, he said. If you let people keep talking, they eventually tell on themselves. You should get other people talking then, besides just me. He shrugged. It's a small crowd. I have time. Okay. There's something else I wanted to hit on here, and I'm trying to remember what it was. Got a little sidetracked. Yeah. Having murders happen every time you come to town depresses turnout a little. That and everyone dying, John said. More from heart attacks. More from heart attacks than serial killers, I believe. You'd be surprised, Addison. Would I? Well, surprise me. It's been a dull night. All right, we'll wrap this up. His phone vibrated. He was going to ignore it, but he was here on business. John opened it up and scrolled through. His brow wrinkled. Is everything okay, John? He didn't answer, but shook his head and kept reading. Is it business or personal? She asked. He looked up as he put his phone away. They caught someone. She stared a moment and tilted her head. The someone that pops up every 5 years. That someone? Don't know yet, but I have to go. Too bad. We were having such a time. Can I call you before you leave town? She actually snorted and said, "Why don't you see if you got the right person first. I'd rather be cleared as a suspect before I consider seeing you. He smiled as he stood. Sorry for bothering you, Addison. Enjoy your evening. She rolled her eyes as he ran out of the gym. Addison took a couple more sips and slipped out into the darkness of her old school as well. All right, there we go.